Welcome back, everybody, to another Top 5 video. Today, we will be talking about the distinguished English monarchs who left a huge impact on England. We will first go over their policies they enacted and see how much it truly benefited all of England. Next, we will go over how noteworthy their military career was. Finally, we will talk about their honored legacy. How much of an influence did they leave on all of England after their reign? So wax your golden crowns and dust off your thrones as we take a look at the most reputable English monarchs. Beginning our list, we have Henry II, born March 5th, 1133. His father was Geoffrey Plantagenet, Count of Anjou, and his mother was Holy Roman Empress Matilda, who was the daughter of King Henry I of England. Henry's reign was marked by major legal and administrative reforms, most notably the Assizes of Clarendon and Northampton, which strengthened royal justice and curtailed the church's legal independence. With his friend Thomas Becket, whom he appointed to Archbishop of Canterbury, Henry passed the Constitutions of Clarendon, allowing clergy accused of crimes to be tried in both royal and church courts. However, Becket later opposed these reforms and excommunicated royal supporters. Though just enraged and not meaning it literally, it is rumored that Henry said something along the lines of, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" However, a group of knights overheard him saying that and took it as an order to kill Thomas Becket, and indeed, they did. The scandal shocked all of England, but Henry restored his image by letting the clergy flog him and laying in front of Becket's shrine for a whole day. Henry would go on to tighten the feudal obligations of his nobles, reform the tax collection system, making it more efficient, and introduced scutage to lords who didn't have enough levies to provide to the royal army, so they could just pay Henry instead. His first military experience came at age 14, leading troops against King Stephen, who had seized the throne of England despite Henry's mother being the rightful heir. Though Henry would be short on funds to pay his troops, Stephen would ultimately feel bad for Henry and told him he would pay his troops if Henry and his soldiers laid down their arms and left England. Though Henry would return when he was 20 to fight Stephen for the crown again in 1153. The Treaty of Wallingford, however, would end the Civil War, naming Henry as Stephen's successor. Henry would then become king the following year because Stephen would die of natural causes. As king, Henry fought campaigns in Wales from 1157 to 1165, winning tribute from local rulers, and launched the first English invasion of Ireland in 1171. Where native and Norman lords submitted to him, and the Pope Adrian IV recognized him as Lord of Ireland. He ruled vast lands across England, Ireland, and France, including Normandy, Anjou, and Aquitaine, through his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine, forming what historians later called the Angevin Empire. His greatest military test came during the Great Revolt of 1173 to 1174, when his sons Henry, Richard, Geoffrey, and also his own wife Eleanor, backed by Louis VII of France, William I of Scotland, and numerous English and French barons, rose up against him. Henry crushed the rebellion, securing his dominions and capturing several enemy strongholds. By the end of his reign, constant wars and family betrayals wore him down. In 1189, gravely ill, he made peace with his rebellious son Richard, naming him his heir before dying shortly after. Henry II's reign reshaped English governance, law, and empire. His legal reforms became the foundation of English common law, and his continental possessions tied England and France together in rivalry for centuries. The Plantagenet dynasty he founded would rule England for over 300 years, making it the longest lasting royal house in English history. At number 4, we have Edward I, known as Edward Longshanks. Born on June 17th or 18th, 1239, to King Henry III and Eleanor of Provence. Edward earned his nickname Longshanks for his remarkable height of 6'2". His reign saw major reforms and powerful yet controversial policies. He introduced a new tax system, especially on wool exports, to fund his wars and provide a steady royal income. In 1290, he infamously expelled England's Jewish population, seizing their assets to finance his military campaigns, a policy that cast a long shadow over his legacy. Edward also strengthened royal authority through legal reforms that standardized property, crime, and feudal law. He would also curb the church's power by requiring royal consent for land purchases, and he even improved policing by establishing a night watch. His 1295 model parliament laid the foundation for the House of Commons, giving commoners a role in governance. Edward's military career began in the Second Barons' War, where he initially routed London's militia at the town of Lewes, but was captured after overextending his forces. A year later, he escaped and crushed Simon de Montfort at the Battle of Evesham in 1265, freeing his father and uncle Richard of Cornwall. He later led English forces in the Ninth Crusade in 1270, where he nearly died from an assassination attempt. In 1272, he got news of his father's death and returned home after a tour of Europe in 1274. To be crowned King of England. It is said that during his coronation, when the crown was put on his head, he immediately took it off, saying he would never wear it again until England gained back all of its rightful territory that had been lost. Edward launched the First Welsh War in 1277, forcing Clwynaf Griffith to yield territory. After a second Welsh rebellion in 1282 to 1283, both Clwynaf and his brother Dafydd were killed, bringing all of Wales under English control. In Scotland, after the death of Alexander III, King of Scotland, his heir Margaret would take his place, but then she would die in 1290, leaving the throne of Scotland vacant. Edward would see this as a great opportunity to declare himself overlord of Scotland and place John Beloy on the throne in 1292 as his puppet. Though Beloy would resist Edward's orders, and Edward would be forced to invade Scotland, winning the Battle of Dunbar in 1296, but later suffering a defeat at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297. He recovered with a victory at the Battle of Falkirk in 1298 and the capture and execution of William Wallace in 1305. But his campaign unraveled when Robert the Bruce rose in rebellion in 1306. Edward died in 1307, and his attempted conquest of Scotland would be a waste, as Robert the Bruce would win a decisive victory against Edward's son, Edward II, during the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, cementing his position as the King of Scots, inevitably leading to the Treaty of Edinburgh and Northampton in 1328, where the English would finally recognize Scotland as an independent kingdom. Despite his rule being somewhat harsh, Edward I was one of England's most capable military commanders and lawmakers. lawmakers. He expanded England's borders, reorganized the government, and reformed English common law. But his expulsion of the Jews and costly wars left economic instability and nearly 360 years of Jewish banishment in England. Stepping in to our top three, we have Athelstan. Born in 894, his father was Edward the Elder, and his mother was Ecgwin. He is debatably the first king of England, after uniting the two most powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, which were the Kingdom of Wessex and the Kingdom of Mercia. Athelstan's policies include creating a new legal code that led to harsh punishments for theft. He reduced blood feuds by encouraging monetary compensation from people who killed certain relatives of other people, reducing revenge killings. He put in place legal protection on the poor and the weak. He made it so nobles could not let their peasants starve, and if they did, they would have to donate a portion of their wealth to charity as a punishment. He also enforced the English nobles to not break their oaths and contracts to him, strengthening his royal authority. He established royal mints and standardized coinage, which improved trade and strengthened his control over the economy. He created market regulations, forcing trade to take place in designated towns under official supervision to prevent fraud and enforce taxation. Athelstan was a very pious man, devoting his entire life to the church, investing in big religious towns like Glastonbury and Malmesbury. He imported relics and books from across Europe, making his court a big religious hub that attracted many renowned and devoted religious scholars. He gave the clergy more positions of power within his government, strengthening the church's power over England. Athelstan was a very good military commander. He invaded Scotland in 934 with a large force that attacked from land and sea. Though there are not really any surviving records on this invasion, he was successful, becoming the overlord to the King of Scotland, Constantine II. Athelstan also advanced troops into Cornwall and Wales, having them successfully submit to English authority. However, Athelstan's invasion began an uprising, with him going to war against Constantine II again, and also Olaf Guthfrithson, Norse Gael King of Dublin, and Owen of Strathclyde would join forces with Constantine against the tyrannical Athelstan. Athelstan would win a decisive victory at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937, further solidifying his dominance, not just over England, but all of the British Isles. He would die in 939 without ever being married or having any children, which was kind of a good thing actually, because there was less tension over who would succeed him, creating more stability in the English crown after his rule. Athelstan's legacy would lay the foundations for English authority over the British Isles for centuries after his rule, as he strengthened the British economy, gave the church more power, and created a social safety net by feeding the commoners. Without his early groundwork, England would have probably never reached the heights that it did in the centuries after his rule. At our runner-up spot, we have Edward III, born on November 13th, 1312, to Edward II and Isabella of France. Edward was one of England's most influential monarchs. Domestically, he restored English as the official language of the royal court, ending nearly 300 years of the French language being the dominant language that English kings used. Inspired by the legends of King Arthur, he founded the Order of the Garter, an elite circle of 24 knights that promoted chivalry and reinforced noble loyalty to the English crown. during the 100 Years' War. He strengthened royal authority by enforcing uniform royal law across his realm, limiting the powers of his barons and overseeing extensive construction projects, including the renovation of Windsor Castle. The arts flourished under his patronage, and his reign saw the development of Parliament into two houses, the Lords and the Commons. Edward also taxed wool exports to fund his wars, and eventually stabilized England's economy with a successful gold coinage system. By reducing the Pope's authority, he further centralized royal control over the English Church. Edward was one of the best English military commanders ever, as he reorganized the army, replacing feudal levies with paid professionals, and pioneering the use of longbowmen. His claim to the French throne sparked the 100 Years' War, and his early victories with the naval battle of Sluis in 1340 secured landing for current and future invasions of France. The Battle of Crécy in 1346 inflicted many French casualties by using longbow tactics, and the Siege of Calais from 1346 to 1347 secured English dominance because Calais remained in English hands for over 200 years and would be used by future monarchs of England as a starting point for French invasions. He also campaigned in Scotland, where his tactics with the longbow again proved devastating. Edward expanded the navy, fortified border castles, and laid the groundwork for England's future as a maritime power. Reigning for 50 years until his death in 1377, making him one of the longest reigning English monarchs. Edward III left a lasting legacy, strengthening royal authority, inspiring national pride, and setting the stage for England's long struggle for dominance over France. Before we unveil the #1 spot, we have some honorable mentions for you. Taking the illustrious #1 spot is Elizabeth I, born on September 7, 1533, to Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. She became one of England's most remarkable monarchs. A devout Protestant, Elizabeth sought to firmly separate England from Catholicism. Through the Elizabethan religious settlement, she declared herself supreme governor of the Church of England, rejecting papal authority while allowing a degree of tolerance towards Catholics and other faiths, creating a balance that helped stabilize a divided realm. Economically, Elizabeth ruled with prudence and foresight. She avoided unnecessary wars, spent frugally, and restored the value of the English coinage that was debased by earlier monarchs. Her reign saw major trade expansion through chartered companies like the Muscovy Company for Russia, the Eastland Company for the Baltic, the Levant Company for the Mediterranean, and the East India Company for overall colonial British trade. These companies would lay the groundwork for Britain's global trade empire. She also introduced one of Europe's first state-organized poor relief systems and presided over a cultural and scientific renaissance. Militarily, Elizabeth rebuilt and modernized the Navy, after her sister, Mary I, weakened the Navy severely, going through costly wars. She also heavily invested in ship design and maritime innovation. She empowered privateers like Sir Francis Drake, John Hawkins, and Walter Raleigh to raid Spanish ships and colonies. These raids fueled wealth for the English, but created high tensions with Spain. By the 1580s, Spain had pretty much declared all-out war against England because of the English privateers attacking their people, and because Elizabeth promoted Protestant expansion even outside of England, and Spain, being very Catholic, did not like Protestant expansion at all. Elizabeth knew a Spanish invasion of England was inevitable, So she ordered Sir Francis Drake to raid Cadiz Harbor in 1587, which was pretty successful as Drake had destroyed 30 ships. A year later, in 1588, King Philip II of Spain launched a massive naval invasion with a Spanish armada of over 130 ships, with up to 130,000 men aboard them, to invade England and dethrone Elizabeth and restore Catholicism as the primary form of Christianity. But Elizabeth had them intercepted by her naval commanders, Lord Charles Howard, John Hawkins, and of course, Sir Francis Drake. And the English would be successful, defeating the giant Spanish Armada. She also crushed Irish uprisings backed by Spain, winning decisively at the Siege of Kinsale in 1601, and supported Protestant rebels in the Netherlands and France. Elizabeth's reign marked a true golden age for England. She restored England as a Protestant nation, fostered religious stability, advanced trade and exploration, and strengthened England's navy and global presence. She is perhaps the only English monarch up until that point where you see such a clear and real strengthening of England in almost every aspect. Well, my chivalrous viewers, we have reached the end of this prestigious list. Do you agree with this list, or do you not? Let your noble voices be heard in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.